Speak up. Where did you get it? Jonathan Whitmore roared. Both of his hands tightened into fists, and his face turned so cold that Annie Carter felt as if her heart had stopped. Where did you get this necklace? Annie was still kneeling on the floor of the long, endless hallway. The mop had fallen sideways beside her. The bucket of pine-scented floor water trembled slightly after the young girl's sudden backward movement. Annie edged back on her knees, one trembling hand reaching for the small silver chain that had slipped from her collar and fallen onto the cold stone floor. Her fingers closed around it as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. "Sir," she stammered, clutching the necklace to her chest. "Sir, please." Jonathan took another step toward her. He was still wearing the coat he had come home in. The buttons had not yet been undone. His tie hung loose at his throat, but his eyes were fixed on the tiny silver pendant in Annie's hand, as if the object had just risen from the grave of a past he had spent years trying to bury. "I am asking you again," he said, his voice louder now. Each word struck the high walls and echoed back. "Where did you get that necklace?" Annie's lips parted, but no sound came out. She had been in the Whitmore house for less than one morning. Mrs. Grace, the family's longtime housekeeper, had taken her down to the laundry room, handed her a stack of towels, and told her to clean the hallway before lunch. And now the richest man in Charleston was standing over her, looking at her as if she were a thief caught with stolen silver in her hand. "It belongs to me, sir," Annie whispered. Jonathan's eyes widened. "To you?" He let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. It sounded more like pain being dragged through anger. "To you," he repeated slowly. "Do you have any idea what you are holding?" Annie's hand shook so badly that the necklace trembled in her palm. "Yes, sir," she answered. "I know. It is my family's necklace." The moment the words left her mouth, Jonathan bent down. He snatched the necklace from Annie's hand. She flinched and pulled her hand back as if she had touched fire. "This is the necklace I gave my wife," he said. His voice dropped lower, but somehow that made the hallway feel even colder. "It disappeared years ago, and today, it falls out of the collar of a girl mopping the floors in my house." Annie looked up at him. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. "Sir, I did not steal it. I swear to you, I did not steal it. My mother gave it to me." "Your mother?" Jonathan turned the pendant over with stiff fingers. On the old silver surface was the image of a small oak tree, its two branches crossing in the center. The edges had been worn smooth by time. He turned it over. The name was still there. "Eleanor." Jonathan's throat tightened. At that moment, the sound of a woman's heels came from the far end of the hallway. Victoria Whitmore appeared, her phone still in her hand. At first, her expression was calm until she saw the scene in front of her. Annie kneeling on the floor, Jonathan holding the necklace, and the mop lying between them like a piece of evidence. "Jonathan?" Victoria asked. "What is going on?" He did not take his eyes off Annie. "She has Eleanor's necklace." Victoria's gaze swept over Annie's plain uniform, her old sneakers, and then stopped on her hands. "Red from cleaning solution." "Oh," she said softly. "Well, that explains enough." Annie quickly shook her head. "No, ma'am. It is not like that. I did not take anything." Before Victoria could answer, Mrs. Grace hurried in from the direction of the laundry room, wiping her hands on her apron as she came. She must have heard Jonathan's voice and rushed over, but the moment she saw the necklace in his hand, her face changed. Her eyes shifted to Annie. The fear in them quickly turned into accusation. "You only started working here this morning, and you already dared to steal from this house?" Mrs. Grace said, her voice as sharp as a knife. Annie's mouth fell open. That accusation hurt her more than Jonathan's anger, because Mrs. Grace had been the first person she met at the back door. She was the one who had shown Annie where to hang her coat. She was the one who had told her where to find clean rags. For one brief hour, Annie had thought the older woman might be kind. "No," Annie said, her voice breaking. "My mother gave it to me. She said it was something left behind by a relative." Mrs. Grace looked her up and down. The last bit of hope in Annie disappeared when she saw the contempt in the woman's eyes. "A relative," Mrs. Grace repeated bitterly. "Girls who walk into houses like this always come with a few stories ready in their pockets. I should have checked your pockets the moment you arrived." "I did not have it in my pocket," Annie said. "I was wearing it around my neck. And does that make it better?" Mrs. Grace turned to Victoria. Her voice softened at once. "Miss Victoria, I am truly sorry. I watched her sign in for work myself, but I never imagined she would be bold enough to bring something like that out in the open." Victoria lifted her chin. She seemed pleased by the support, but she was wise enough not to show it too openly. Grace, you did everything you could. Some people are simply born to take advantage of trust. Mrs. Grace nodded again and again. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Then she turned to Jonathan, her face suddenly full of pain, as if she were the one who had been betrayed. Mr. Whitmore, I take full responsibility. I should never have allowed her through the laundry area. Mrs. Whitmore's belongings should have always been safe under my care. Annie felt herself growing smaller with every word. She was still kneeling on the floor. One knee was soaked with mop water. One hand gripped the baseboard to keep herself from falling. Please, Annie said, looking straight at Jonathan because he was holding her necklace. I know this sounds strange, but I did not take it from this house. My mother kept it wrapped in a handkerchief in the closet. Last month, when we were short on rent, she finally gave it to me. I asked her if we should sell it. She said no. She told me that no matter how hard things got, I must never sell it. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the pendant. Why? Because she said there was a name engraved on it, Annie replied. She said that name was important. Victoria stepped closer. And you expect us to believe that? A necklace engraved with Eleanor's name just happens to appear around your neck, and you know nothing about it? Annie shook her head. I do not know why her name is on it. I only know what my mother told me. Mrs. Grace let out a contemptuous laugh. Your mother should have taught you not to touch what does not belong to you. Annie's face tightened, but she did not answer. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment. What is your mother's name? Marion Carter, sir. The name did not strike him the way Eleanor's name had, but something in Annie's voice made him pause. Victoria noticed it immediately. Jonathan, do not turn this into a drama, she said coldly. Call the agency. Search her things. Then, dismiss her. Mrs. Grace nodded at once. That would be best, sir. Quiet and proper. Annie's chest tightened. Quiet and proper. That was how rich people ruined a poor girl's future without ever needing to raise their voices. I can prove I am not lying, Annie said. Jonathan looked up. His face was still cold, but something in his eyes had changed. You said it belonged to you. Then you said your mother gave it to you. Now you say you can prove it. Do you understand what this necklace means to me? Yes, sir, Annie answered, though in truth, she did not fully understand. No, you do not. His voice rose again. I gave it to Eleanor on our first wedding anniversary. For years, she wore it around her neck every morning. Then one day, she came back from a trip without it. I asked her about it, and she refused to tell me. She carried that secret with her until the day she died. And now you are kneeling here, telling me it came from your mother, and you expect me to believe that? Annie clasped her hands together to stop them from trembling. I do not expect you to believe me right away, sir. I am only telling you what I know. That is not enough. Mrs. Grace took a deep breath, then stepped closer to Victoria, one hand pressed to her chest. Mr. Whitmore, please do not let this upset you too much. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. I should have checked her background more thoroughly. The agency said she was quiet and hardworking, so I let my heart soften. Pity clouded my judgment. Annie looked at Mrs. Grace. The woman's eyes were lowered, but at the corner of her mouth, there was a faint satisfaction she could not fully hide. She was trying to prove her loyalty by making Annie look guilty. Victoria gently placed a hand on Mrs. Grace's arm. Do not blame yourself. You have served this family for many years. Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Grace said, her voice almost a whisper. But Mrs. Eleanor was always so kind to me. Today, I have failed her. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Eleanor's name had always been his deepest wound, and Mrs. Grace knew it. Annie saw it too. She saw how the older woman's false grief quickly turned into a net, falling over her shoulders, tightening around her, forcing her into the role of a thief. I have proof, Annie said louder now. She was not rude. She did not shout, but her voice was clear enough for the whole hallway to hear. I am not making this up. My mother kept it with a photograph. Victoria pressed her lips together. Then bring that proof here, Annie Carter. But until then, do not mistake pity for trust. Annie lowered her head. Yes, ma'am. Jonathan still held the necklace tightly. For a moment, it seemed he did not want to let it go, as if that small piece of silver was the last bit of Eleanor's warmth left in the world. Then he looked down at Annie's hands. They were still open, still waiting, still trembling. and perhaps some part of him suddenly understood the cruelty of taking away the last thing a poor girl had, while accusing her of taking something from him. At last, Jonathan returned the necklace. Annie took it with both hands. She pressed it to her chest carefully, as if she were holding a wound, but she did not put it back around her neck. Jonathan looked at the mop, then at the rag lying beside the bucket. This time, he did not pick anything up. The anger inside him had not yet settled. "Mrs. Grace," he said. "Yes, sir," the housekeeper answered at once. "Pay her for the full day." Mrs. Grace blinked. "For the entire day, sir?" "She worked. Pay her." Victoria turned sharply toward him. "Jonathan, surely you are not going to let her leave with that necklace?" Jonathan looked at the pendant in Annie's hand. His face tightened again, but his voice was lower now. "I will not call the police on a girl based on a photograph I have not seen and a mother I have not spoken to." Annie stood still. Mrs. Grace showed a flash of displeasure, but quickly hid it. "Yes, sir, as you wish." Jonathan turned back to Annie. "Tomorrow you will bring the proof." Annie nodded. "Yes, sir. And tell your mother I want to speak with her." Annie hesitated. "I can tell her, but I cannot promise she will agree." Something passed across Jonathan's face then. Too quick to name, too deep to ignore. "That will do." Victoria let out a quiet breath through her nose, but said nothing more. Annie slowly stood up. Her knees ached. Her palms smelled strongly of floor cleaner, and the necklace in her hand suddenly felt strangely heavy, as if it were made not only of silver, but of secrets buried for years. She bent down and picked up the mop, not because she still wanted to work there, but because leaving it on the floor would only give Mrs. Grace one more reason to look down on her. Annie carefully leaned the mop against the wall. Mrs. Grace stepped aside, but not out of kindness. "Go to the back office to receive your pay," she said, "and do not touch anything on your way." Annie nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She walked toward the staff room, her hand clenched tightly around the necklace. Behind her, Jonathan Whitmore remained standing in the wide hallway, motionless, like a man who had just seen the ghost of his past. On one side was his dead wife. On the other was the poor girl whom the whole house had just condemned. Annie did not look back until she reached the bus stop 3 blocks away from the Whitmore house. Behind her, the iron gate closed with a soft mechanical hum. The sound was too quiet, too polite. Nothing like the way it felt, as if a door had just slammed shut on her life. Cars still moved silently beneath the shade of the trees. The people behind their steering wheels continued on with their day. A woman walking her dog still bent down to adjust the leash. A delivery truck still stopped at the corner. The world did not know that Annie Carter had just been humiliated, and it did not care. She clenched the necklace tightly in her palm, so tightly that the silver edges pressed into her skin. The envelope holding her wages for the day was inside her purse, a thin white envelope with no name written on it. Mrs. Grace had counted each bill in the back office without once looking Annie in the eye. "Mr. Whitmore said to pay you for the full day," she muttered, her voice annoyed, as if the money had been taken from her own kitchen drawer. Then she pushed the envelope across the desk with 2 fingers, as though touching it any longer might dirty her hand. "You heard him. Bring the proof tomorrow, and don't think that pitiful look on your face is going to solve anything." Annie had not answered, not because she had nothing to say, but because if she had opened her mouth at that moment, she was afraid she would burst into tears right in front of the woman who was waiting to see exactly that. The bus was late. Annie sat near the middle, her purse on her lap and her work shoes tucked beneath the seat. She had wiped her hands on her skirt more times than she could count, but her palms still smelled faintly of floor cleaner. The scent of pine, the scent of cold stone floors, the scent of a morning when all she had wanted was to do honest work and go home with a little money to help her mother pay the bills. She wanted to close her eyes, but every time her lashes fell, Jonathan Whitmore's voice echoed in her mind. "Where did you get it?" That question was not just a question. It was the look of suspicion. It was the hand that had snatched the necklace from hers. It was Mrs. Grace's contemptuous laugh. It was the way Victoria Whitmore had looked her up and down, as if poverty itself were a crime. By the time Annie reached North Charleston, the afternoon heat had softened over the cracked sidewalks. She passed the drugstore on the corner, the laundromat with 2 broken machines marked "out of order," and the small diner where Marion sometimes picked up extra shifts when her breathing allowed it. The apartment she shared with her mother was on the 2nd floor of an old brick building. The paint near the stair railing had peeled away in patches. Each step creaked softly under Annie's feet, as if the building itself had grown tired of standing for so long. When she reached the door, Annie stopped. She opened her hand and looked down at the necklace. Before, it had always seemed simple. A small silver chain. An old pendant. Something her mother had told her to keep safe. But now, it seemed like something that had been waiting in silence. Waiting for the right person to see it. Waiting for the right wound to be touched. Annie took a breath and opened the door. Marion Carter was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of her lay a spread of bills and a cup of tea that had gone cold. She lifted her head the moment Annie stepped inside. Mothers often have a strange kind of instinct. They can read the pain on their child's face before the child has even figured out how to hide it. And Marion saw everything. "You're home early," she said. Annie closed the door. For a long moment, she only stood there, her hand still wrapped tightly around the necklace. Then she asked, "Mama, who is Eleanor Whitmore?" If Annie's pain touched your heart, please like this video and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Your support helps this story reach more people who believe in truth, justice, and kindness. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. That question changed the air in the small kitchen. Marion's hand slipped slightly toward the edge of the table. Not quickly, not dramatically, but enough for Annie to notice. Her fingers gripped the hospital bill in front of her, as if a thin piece of paper could keep her from falling apart. "Where did you hear that name?" "At the Whitmore house." Annie stepped closer. "Mr. Whitmore saw the necklace. He said it belonged to his wife. He said he gave it to her. He said it disappeared years ago." Marion closed her eyes. The silence made Annie's heart ache. She had tried to stay strong from the moment she walked away from that iron gate. But standing in front of her mother, in the little kitchen that smelled of cold tea and cough medicine, she suddenly felt small again, like she had when she was a child. "He thought I stole it," Annie said. Marion's eyes opened wide. "He accused you?" "Yes." "Did anyone touch you?" "No." Annie swallowed hard, "But he snatched it out of my hand. Mrs. Grace acted as if I had walked in there just to steal. And Victoria Whitmore stood there looking at me like she already knew what kind of person I was." Marion rose from her chair too quickly and immediately broke into a coughing fit. Annie reached out to steady her, but Marion waved her away, perhaps more ashamed of her weakness than of the cough itself. "Sit down, sweetheart," Marion said hoarsely. "I don't want to sit down." Annie's voice trembled. "I want to know why the richest man in Charleston thinks the necklace you gave me belonged to his dead wife." Marion looked around the small kitchen. At the unpaid bills, at the chipped sugar bowl, at the window facing the sunlit parking lot. There was a tiredness on her face that Annie had grown used to seeing. But today, beneath that tiredness, there was something else. Guilt. "I should have told you more," Marion said. Annie's anger softened a little. Not because it had disappeared, but because, in that moment, her mother looked smaller than she had that morning. So small that Annie could not bear to push her any harder. "Then tell me now," she said. "Right now," Marion nodded slowly. "Get the blue tin box from my closet." Annie went into the bedroom. The room was small, just large enough for a bed, an old dresser, and a wooden chair by the window. She found the box on the highest shelf, behind a stack of neatly folded towels. It was the same tin box that had once held Christmas cookies years ago. Marion had wrapped several rubber bands around it, as if the past inside might spill out if it were not held shut. Annie carried the box back and placed it on the kitchen table. Marion opened it herself. Inside were old envelopes, yellowed birthday cards, a few receipts, and a photograph Annie knew well but had never truly studied. Marion picked up the photograph first. In it, two women stood outside a country church. They had their arms linked together and were smiling at whoever had taken the picture. Annie had always known that one of them was her mother. The other was Aunt Ellie, the woman who had sent cards and money to Annie until the day she died. Marion touched the edge of the photograph. Her real name was Eleanor, she said. After she married, she became Eleanor Whitmore. Before that, she was Eleanor Carter. Anya sat down. Her legs suddenly felt weak. "She was my sister," Marion said. "My twin sister." Annie looked at the photograph again. That face, those eyes, that smile, now she could not fail to see it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I did tell you she was family. You only told me pieces." "I know. Why?" Marion drew in a deep breath. It caught near the end, as if it had snagged on something that had been lodged inside her chest for years. "Because Eleanor asked me to stay quiet for a while. Then she got sick. After she died, that silence became a habit I didn't know how to break. That answer isn't enough, Mama. No, Marion said softly. It isn't. She folded her arms, as if trying to hold herself together. Your aunt married into a family that never truly accepted her. They smiled in public. They praised her at charity events. They put her picture in society pages when it made them look generous and civilized. But behind closed doors, there were always whispers. Marion paused. Not always loud, not always direct, and that was the worst part. Some people can make you bleed, then still make you look rude for daring to say it hurts. Annie's throat tightened. Eleanor loved Jonathan, Marion continued. I believe that. And I believe he loved her too. But love in a family like that always comes with rules made by other people. She had to be careful about everything. How she dressed, how she spoke, which relatives she mentioned, which parts of her past had to stay hidden. So she hid us. Marion flinched slightly. Then she lowered her head. Yes. Annie looked down at the necklace. Because we were poor? Because we were poor, Marion answered. Because we are black. Because I worked jobs they considered beneath them. Because you and I lived in places they would never set foot in unless there was a ribbon-cutting ceremony and a camera nearby. Marion's voice remained steady, but her eyes had turned red. She was not ashamed of us, Annie. She was ashamed of the way they treated us. Annie wanted to believe that. She truly did, but part of her still hurt. Part of her was still the girl who had been kneeling on the Whitmore floor, being looked at like a thief, simply because she had worn something that belonged to her own blood. She sent money, Marion said, not to buy silence, but to help us get through hard days. Money for your school clothes, medicine, food when I was out of work. Your first winter coat came from her. Your books, too. She wrote your name by hand in every card. Annie remembered that blue coat. She had loved it so much that she kept wearing it even after the weather began to warm, even when the sleeves had grown a little too short. Marion reached into the tin box and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a note written in soft, beautiful handwriting. Annie picked it up and read it. For Annie, when she is old enough to keep meaningful things, tell her this is love, not obligation. Annie read the sentence twice. By the second time, the words had begun to blur. She gave you this necklace? Annie asked. Marion nodded. A few months before she died. She said she was going away to rest for a while, but I knew she was sicker than she wanted to admit. That afternoon, she came here. Jonathan didn't know. She sat right where you are sitting now and took the necklace off her neck. Marion looked at the chain in Annie's hand. I told her to keep it. She said no. She said that if she left this world before she had told the whole truth, then at least something with her name on it should stay with us. Annie's fingers tightened around the pendant. Why didn't she tell him? Marion was silent for a long time. Fear can live beside love, Annie, she said quietly. People don't like to hear that, but it's true. Eleanor was afraid of what Jonathan's family would do with the truth. She was afraid they would turn me into a joke and turn you into some poor child they could use to show off their kindness. She was afraid Jonathan would try to fix everything with money and accidentally make it worse. She swallowed, and perhaps by the time she truly wanted to tell him, she had been silent too long. By then, speaking the truth no longer felt like telling the truth. It felt like confessing to a mistake. Annie turned toward the window. The parking lot below shimmered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere down in the yard, a car radio was playing an old hymn, the sound so low it seemed like a memory coming from far away. He wants to meet you, Annie said. Marion's shoulders stiffened. I told him I couldn't promise you would agree. You were right. Will you go? Marion did not answer right away. She gathered the letters and placed them back into the tin box more slowly than usual. What did he look like when he saw the photograph? She asked. I didn't show it to him. Marion looked up. You didn't? He didn't believe me. He told me to bring proof tomorrow. I had the photograph, but everything happened too fast. Mrs. Grace kept standing there, making everything worse. I could not let them pass that photograph around like evidence in a courtroom while I stood there being judged. A small flash of pride crossed Marion's face. Good. Annie lowered her head. I was so scared. Marion looked at her for a long time. Being scared does not mean you lost your dignity. Annie let out a breath. It was the first thing all day that made her feel as if she could breathe again. Marion closed the tin box and pushed it toward her. Tomorrow, you take the photograph. Take the letter too. But you do not beg. Do you hear me? Yes, Mama. If Jonathan Whitmore wants the truth, then he must receive it with respect. And if he only wants to accuse, then let him do that by himself. We do not need to help anyone make us small." Annie nodded, but her stomach twisted at the thought of going back to that house tomorrow, of walking through that iron gate again, of seeing Mrs. Grace, of standing before Victoria Whitmore, of facing the eyes of the man who had made her tremble on the hallway floor. Marion reached across the table and placed her thin hand over her daughter's. "I'm sorry, Annie." "For what?" "For letting you walk into a place filled with so much history I had never explained to you." Annie looked at her mother's hand. Thin, warm, trembling slightly. "You were just trying to protect me, weren't you?" "Yes." "Then I understand." She was quiet for a moment. "But it still hurts." Marion nodded. "You are allowed to hurt." The two of them sat together with that truth for a long time. Neither of them tried to fix it. Neither of them told the other to be stronger. Sometimes, the gentlest thing a person can do for someone they love is sit beside them and let the pain exist without judgment. That night, Annie placed the necklace on the small table beside her bed, next to the photograph and the note. She did not wear it to sleep. For the first time in her life, the necklace no longer felt comforting. It felt more like a question made of silver, a question bearing Eleanor's name. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore house, Jonathan stood alone in Eleanor's old sitting room. Victoria had followed him in there, still speaking in a soft but warning tone. She reminded him not to let his emotions lead him. She reminded him that people like Annie could make up any story they wanted. She reminded him that the Whitmore family's reputation should not be dragged into some cheap little drama. But Jonathan had asked her to leave. Mrs. Grace had also lingered near the doorway for a long while, as if simply standing there might allow her to hear what the past was breathing out. At last, he told her to leave as well. Now the room belonged only to him. Jonathan opened the drawer of Eleanor's writing desk, the drawer he had not touched in years. Inside were a few pens long dried of ink, a stack of old stationery, a pair of reading glasses, and the faint scent of lavender. Somehow, grief had preserved that fragrance for the woman who was gone. He stood there for a long time. Then he slowly closed the drawer, and the memory returned. He remembered the day Eleanor came home from her final trip. Her neck had been bare. Her eyes were red. Her hand kept rising to the place where the necklace used to rest, as if her body still remembered something she had chosen to let go. He had asked her, "Where's the necklace?" Eleanor had looked at him for a long time. Then she had answered, "Some things are safer when they are protected by love." At the time, Jonathan had thought illness had made her say strange things. Now, he was no longer sure. Jonathan sat down in the chair by the window. Outside, darkness slowly settled over the back garden. The window panes reflected his face back at him, older, lonelier, and filled with questions he had avoided for far too long. He sat there until the room was completely dark. By sunrise, Annie had already dressed for work, though her stomach told her not to go. She stood at the small kitchen counter while Marion wrapped the photograph and Eleanor's note in a clean white handkerchief. The necklace lay beside them, the old silver oak turned face up, the name on the back hidden against the table. "You don't have to go alone," Marion said. Annie shook her head. "You coughed half the night." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have." Marion tied the handkerchief with care. "Not too tight, not too loose. If he raises his voice again, you leave. I don't care about the job. I don't care about the money. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "And if that Victoria woman speaks down to you, you don't trade insults. You just say what is true. A clean truth does not need a dirty mouth to defend it." Annie almost smiled. "You practice that?" "I've lived long enough to earn it." They stood there in the pale light coming through the blinds. The apartment was quiet except for the old refrigerator kicking on and the distant sound of traffic. Annie put the handkerchief bundle into her bag, then slipped the necklace around her neck. It rested beneath her shirt, cold against her skin. Marion noticed. "You're wearing it? You told me not to sell it." "You didn't tell me to hide it." A small pain crossed Marion's face, mixed with pride. Eleanor would have liked that answer. At the bus stop, Annie kept one hand on her bag the whole ride. Men in work boots climbed on downtown. A nurse in blue scrubs dozed near the window. A man with a folded newspaper gave up his seat to an older woman without saying a word. It was the kind of ordinary morning Annie had always trusted, because ordinary mornings did not ask her to defend who she was. But the closer the bus came to the Whitmore neighborhood, the less ordinary the day felt. When Annie reached the back entrance, Mrs. Grace was waiting before she knocked. Her apron was tied tight, her hair pinned back, her mouth already set. "You came back," Mrs. Grace said. Mr. Whitmore told me to. That doesn't mean you should have. Annie held her bag with both hands. I brought what he asked for. Mrs. Grace's eyes lowered to the bag. We'll see what you brought. Annie said nothing. Marion had been right. A clean truth did not need a dirty mouth. Mrs. Grace opened the door wider and let her in. Wipe your shoes. Annie did. Twice. The kitchen staff moved more quietly than the day before. A cook stirred grits at the stove. Someone sliced tomatoes for a luncheon tray. Coffee hissed in the machine. Nobody greeted Annie, but everyone knew. In a large house, news traveled faster than footsteps. By breakfast, every hallway had learned that the new girl had been accused of wearing Mrs. Whitmore's lost necklace. Mrs. Grace pointed toward the laundry room. Leave your coat. Mr. Whitmore wants you in the library. The library? You heard me. Mrs. Grace leaned closer. And don't start thinking this means anything. Rich men get curious. Then they get tired. Girls like you should remember that. Annie hung her coat slowly. May I ask something, Mrs. Grace? The older woman folded her arms. What? Were you kind to Mrs. Whitmore? The question landed in a place Mrs. Grace had not prepared. Her face hardened. Don't speak of her. I only asked because yesterday you said you cared about her memory. Mrs. Grace stepped nearer, lowering her voice. I served her. I kept her rooms. I did what was proper. That wasn't what I asked. For a second, Mrs. Grace had no answer. Then she turned away. Library, now. Annie walked through the service hall and into the main part of the house. The floors had been cleaned before she arrived. Sunlight fell across the staircase and the long runner rug. On the walls, framed portraits of Whitmore men and women watched.